Lost in the Sound of Separation really showed that Underoath was not going to go back to the more catchier and accessible sounds that they kind of explored with the changing of times and really refined with They're Only Chasing Safety. This was even more solidified by the departure of the last remaining original member of the band, Aaron Gillespie, and the clean vocals really still showed up really heavily on Lost in Sounds of Separation, as well as Define the Great Line. They were really a strong part of those albums, despite the departure away from the more catchier, cleaner side of things with They're Only Chasing Safety. And the band kind of stopped relying on them, but they were still a very strong part of all those songs. And the departure of Aaron Gillespie also meant that the band was going to have to find a new drummer as well as a new clean vocalist, because Aaron Gillespie really played double duty within the band. So it was a pretty big departure. I mean, they lost a clean vocalist and a drummer at the same time, with just the departure of just one single person, one single member. And again, he was the last remaining original member of the band. He was the only one that was featured on every single one of their albums up until this point. And even in their kind of really rocky history of lineup changes, they'd never really faced something like this. Yet the band still persevered through everything, and they delivered to us Disambiguation on November 9th, 2010. Define the Great Line was probably the heaviest album that Underoath really ever delivered to us, and Lost in the Sounds of Separation was probably the sludgiest album that they ever gave us. However, Disambiguation kind of took a different approach to things. It was still heavy, but it brought in a lot of that weird ambient noise and electronic work and just odd sounds that they kind of explored with the previous albums and experimented with a little bit, but it's really in full force here on Disambiguation on this album. The lyrics right off the bat are kind of really dark and brooding and kind of depressing a lot, which is kind of the trend that they were going with the previous two albums, Define the Great Line and Lost in the Sounds of Separation. But while they're dark and everything, there's a real sense of purpose to them as well. They're really kind of deep and thought out. And they really do, again, have a real sense of purpose of when they wrote these lyrics. There's kind of a real sense of loss and uncertainty with this band, and you kind of get what they were going through at this time with, again, the whole lineup change. Spencer Chamberlain himself was going through a lot of stuff during this time period, and it's really felt throughout this entire album, through lyrically and through his vocal work as well on here. The hole that was left by Aaron Gillespie on this album is filled by Daniel Davidson, previously of Norma Jean, taking up the role of drummer on this album. And Spencer Chamberlain himself is filling the double duty on this album for clean and unclean vocals. Now, Daniel Davidson is one of my favorite drummers of all time. I've kind of mentioned that before, but on this album, his parts kind of feel a little bit either rushed or just not produced very well. They feel really subdued, and they're not as interesting as things that he's done in the past with Norma Jean, and even beyond this album, when we got Low Teens with Every Time I Die. And even compared to Gillespie's work on previous Underoath albums, it's just there's not as much depth to the drumming on this album. And I don't know whether that's because he came in pretty late to this band, or if it's the production on this album, or if it was just whatever reason, but it just kind of sounds flat. And I mean, it's nothing bad. I mean, technically speaking, the drumming on here is pretty good. It's just that the overall result that we get from here is just, it doesn't sound as dynamic as it had in the past, and as strong as it had in the past with Aaron Gillespie's drum work. And even with Daniel Davidson's previous projects, it doesn't sound quite as interesting as things that he's done in the past here. However, that kind of subdued nature of it really fits in with the overall sound of Disambiguation, and it kind of actually works for this album. It may not be as interesting to listen to, and I think he could have done a little bit more with it, but the whole album kind of has this really somber feel to it, and that kind of fits in there as well. Now, as far as the changing of the vocalists here, with the departure of Aaron Gillespie on clean vocals and Spencer kind of filling that duty, it's really going to be a mixed bag for a lot of people. Personally, I actually enjoy it. I think that he really stepped up on this album, especially with the clean vocal work, and did actually a pretty decent job. But your enjoyment of it's really going to depend on how much you like his voice overall, which kind of goes without saying since it's just him. Now, that said, there is a bit of a lacking of the kind of dynamism and depth that they had with having two vocalists, because they really worked well with each other and kind of bounced off each other very, very well. Spencer had his range, Aaron had his range, and they kind of meshed together just so perfectly on the album. So there is a little bit of a lacking of depth on here, and it doesn't kind of pop as much as it had in the past. But I still feel that Spencer Chamberlain really did a great job on this album. You really get a sense of emotion conveyed through his vocal work, whether it's clean or unclean or anything in between. So I really definitely give him props for that, because not a lot of other vocalists would really have been managed to do that. Many would probably try and fail. Most bands probably would have gone out and tried to find another replacement. And the thing is, there probably really is no replacement for Aaron Gillespie, especially that kind of back and forth dynamic that these two had. I don't think you're going to recapture that with another vocalist. So I think they played it smart here by having Spencer Chamberlain just taking and filling double duty with this album. And I definitely think he really pulled it off here. Now, on this album, as I mentioned, there's also a huge use of the kind of weird electronic and vocal manipulation on here to create these just psychedelic sounds at times. And I really, really dig that on this album. It's really moody and atmospheric throughout the entire thing because of that work that they do. For example, even the opening song, In Division, kind of sounds like you're in a boiler room with like dripping water and leaky pipes and things. I know that sounds super weird, but that's the kind of the sound that it gives. And the opening is weird. I mean, it works though. It kind of fills you in and gets you in the mood for this album, because that's kind of how it feels. It feels like a leaking ship or just kind of damp and dark and nasty. And that's the whole feeling throughout this entire album. And right off the bat, it kind of fills you into that. It's something I kind of really like. Then there's the song Driftwood, which sounds kind of like a record that's been warped and is spinning around, and then you hear these background voices that you can't understand, and then Spencer Chamberlain comes in with clean vocals, and then it kind of cuts out for a part, and it just his last vocal kind of manipulated back and forth, and then it just comes back in with everything, and the song continues on. It's just these weird little moments that they really pulled off on this album that they hinted at with the previous albums, but never really went full force with. Now, they definitely tried experimenting on previous albums like Define the Great Line and Lost in the Sound of Separation, but it's really in full force here. They went out and they tried just new things, and most of them worked. I mean, there are moments on this album that kind of feel a little bit boring and don't really work, and I feel for that this album didn't immediately grab my attention, but I think that's because there's just so many layers and so many there's so much depth to this album that you kind of have to listen to it a couple times before you really appreciate what's actually going on here. And I feel like that was my case, where I kind of just pushed this album off when I first heard it, and then went back to it later on and really kind of listened to it and really gave it a chance, and it's really grown on me, and I actually love it. It's become one of my favorite Underoath albums at this point. I think they just did an excellent job. I mean, despite the differences in sound, and despite the fact that, there's no original members, and Aaron Gillespie, who was a huge part of Underoath, obviously, is missing on this album, I still think they managed to pull it off. I mean, the album itself is just divisive to a lot of people. I mean, you're going to have fans who are still looking for something like They're Only Chasing Safety, who definitely aren't going to like this. You're going to have people who liked Lost in the Sound of Separation or Define the Great Line, and probably are going to not like how it's not as heavy as those albums, just outrightly heavy. And I think there's going to be some people who aren't going to like that. There's going to be people who definitely aren't going to like the fact that Aaron Gillespie isn't on here. So I think there's a lot of people who don't give this album enough of a chance because of those reasons of what their expectations are. But you really kind of have to set your expectations at the door for this, because it's not lacking in any way. There's really, it is an Underoath album, and it's everything that makes the band great. And I just think, you know, if this is the last album they gave us, and if they were going to go out on this album, they chose the perfect album to go out on, because this is definitely a high note. And while it may not be for everyone, this is the Underoath album that they wanted to make and that they needed to make. Thank you so much for watching the Underoath Review Series. That concludes the series with Disambiguation. I appreciate you guys watching. So let me know down in the comments, do you think that this was a good album for them despite the departure of Aaron Gillespie? What is your favorite Underoath album? I want to hear from you guys, so let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more.